定人。
We have a quorum and we've passed the appointed hour. Let us invite the officials into the room. We have the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of February, paper CB1, 1316, 1213. The minutes have been sent to members up till now. There is no proposed amendment, so shall we confirm the minutes? Thank you. Today we have two discussion items. First, current legislation and administrative measures on the control of noise pollution and associated public expenditure, as well as case of noise pollution and mitigation measures. Now, in terms of cases, they are just for reference. We draw general issues from the cases. And after we've handled that, then we will meet with the experts from the academic institutions to speak on air quality modeling in Hong Kong. To discuss with us this item 2, they are Mr. Tan Kin Fai, Assistant Director of Environmental Assessment, Mr. Maurice Young, Principal Assistant Protection Officer, Assessment Noise, Mr. Louis Chen, Principal Environmental Protection Officer, Regional Assessment. Ms. Christine Low, the Undersecretary, will come later. As I understand, she has to deal with the landfills. All right, if I may invite the department to take us through the paper. In fact, there are several related papers, and they are CB1 982 1213 (01). The administration's paper on the measures and public expenditure, and then the next paper CB1 1116 (01) by Professor Lam Kin Chi, and then a submission by the Civic Exchange numbered CB1 1118, and then the administration's response 1366 1213 12 and also a submission by Mr. Chris Knopp 1366 (03). So let us deal with paper CB1 982 (01) first. So who is to take us through the paper? Mr. Tan, please. My apologies. I'm a bit late. Yes, we know that. I'll let you take a breath and settle down first. Thank you, Chairman. Well, in May, we submitted a paper on current legislation and administrative measures on the control of noise pollution and the associated public expenditure. The paper informs members of the legislation and administrative measures on noise control. And the paper covers several areas. That includes noise control in the environment, noise emitted in this construction sites, industrial and commercial premises, and also noise control in respect of residential premises in public places. There are also issues of aircraft noise, traffic noise, railway noise, and also we informed you what we have done in terms of mitigating such measures and the education efforts we've made. I will not go into the details of the paper because I think members want to ask questions in respect of the paper. What I'm happy to take questions. Yes, the Undersecretary.
因為上一次我哋開會嘅時候咧
Now, at our last meeting, members raised a number of issues, and we also have some guest speakers. In fact, two professors have arrived, or rather, two professors were present, and members asked a number of questions, and we dealt with them in the paper, so I'm not going to belabor the point. There are certain outstanding issues. I think that's related to the function of this subcommittee. You want to understand the various pieces of legislation and policies, and after discussion you may give advice to the administration. Since the last meeting, if you want to pursue any issues in respect of government policies, well, you discussed the line dances last time, and you also raised the issue of double glazed windows for as noise abatement measures. We don't have a clear policy, but if you are really interested, Chairman, if you want to spend more time on this, if you want to change policy, if you want to change law, this is the opportunity. That's I want to emphasize. I thank the Undersecretary for being aggressive in terms of noise, air, and light pollution. After each meeting, the Secretariat notes down items outstanding and also items that can have certain recommendations. Now the summer recess is coming, and during the recess, the Secretariat will try to tie up the loose ends. The Secretary will spell out the questions as well as conclusions and findings. We'll discuss among ourselves, of course, and then we'll also invite officials to come along and discuss with you on certain recommendations. As for the noise abatement windows, the design of such windows and who is to pay for the cost of installing such windows for old buildings, that will be dealt with later. Perhaps let's go back to paper 982, bracket 01. There are only 29 paragraphs excluding the annex. So shall we go over the area, the issues one by one? Paragraphs 5 to 8, noise from construction sites. Any questions from members, please? Well, if no, then no. Huh? If there is none, then there is nothing. Perhaps I'll get the ball rolling. Let me ask the department. With regard to piling, the so-called percussion piling is now being banned, but we have heard complaints that they still they still face experience noise nuisance. Say, for example, the noise of the concrete mixer vehicles, concrete mixer lorries, the pouring of concrete and things like that, such operations are really noisy. According to the paper, it says depending on the distance from schools and residential units. This 12 hours, 5 hours, or 3 hours, will that care for this situation? And also for road works, because of traffic, heavy traffic, works cannot be conducted in daytime. Well, it's okay if such works are conducted on highways or flyovers, but some repaving of road surface is done in the evening, and there are roads or buildings on either side. Yes, I will speak on that first, and then Mr. Chan will provide the details. As for noise control on construction sites, now there are designated mechanical equipment, and also there are certain procedures such as scaffoldings, erection or dismantling of scaffoldings or frameworks. They have to be done within specified time. As for percussion piling, a permit has to be obtained from the EPD, and then the EPD will look at the site, the location of the site, and decide on the number of hours and also the time and also the stretch of time. Same for roadworks. Mr. Chan can speak on the details. Thank you, Chairman. First, let me speak on percussion piling requirement. In Hong Kong, if percussion piling is to be conducted, an application for noise permit has to be obtained first, and we will only allow Monday to Saturday, and between 3 hours, 5 hours to 12 hours, depending on the noise of the percussive piling. The louder the noise, the shorter the hours. Unless the site is far away from residential units, the operation will not get a permit for 12 hours.
And even for commercial districts, they will also be protected. And therefore, in the urban areas, in most cases, only 3 hours permit would be issued. And which 3 hours? Well, it depends on the situations in the locality. Most likely, it would be during the morning hours, for example, 9 to 10, together with 12:30 to 1:30 during lunch, and then after people are off work from 5 to 6. So most likely it would be these 3 hours in order to minimize the impact on the residents in the neighborhood. And some members might ask, how come we still allow percussive piling to take place? Well, that's because of Hong Kong's soil conditions. In some cases, we have caverns and also some rock layers, and also for wall piling, it may not be feasible. And we will have to bore through the rock layers before we can really carry out the works. And therefore, for the time being, there is no way that we can comprehensively replace percussive piling. Therefore, we can only make use of such permits so that they will not be allowed to carry out such works in excess of certain number of hours. So we try to make use of the permit system to minimize the impact. And also during night time, how come we also have to carry out some repaving works over certain sections of the road? Well, as the chair just said, in highways, because they are very busy during daytime, and therefore usually we would also issue the CNP, the construction noise permits. But then even in places where they are not part of expressways, for example, Hennessy Road or Connaught Road, Well, during daytime, there is no way that they can be closed, because if you close those roads, then the nuisance or the impact on the traffic would be even more serious than closing them during nighttime. That's why usually we would require the contractors for the works to consult the police to see if they can carry out such works during daytime, and if that's not possible, then they will have to ask the police to get an advice confirming that it cannot be done during daytime, and then the police would advise as to which hours would be most suitable for such works to be carried out, and therefore in most cases we would arrange for such works to be carried out during the morning of weekends, Sundays, and also at night time. And if that's done, then the contractor would be required to use the most silent or quiet mechanical equipment. Other than that, the affected residents would also be informed as to how often that would take place and when that would take place. Usually such works would only require 1 or 2 nights works. So such arrangements, well, since 1989, with the enactment of the Noise Pollution Control Ordinance, that's been the system in place, and so far the progress has been okay. And in some cases, some contractors might not entirely comply with the requirement of the use of silencer or noise abating equipment, but then we will conduct inspections, and if they do not comply fully with the requirement under the noise permit or CNP, then we will take enforcement action. All right, please raise your hands if you want to ask questions. Yes, sorry, Chairman. You refer to a particular paragraph, and that particular paragraph might not be entirely in line with the question that I'd like to ask. Can I be permitted to ask this question? Well, probably I'm not in the know. Well, when it comes to noise nuisance, in particular when it comes to works on major infrastructural projects, well, we are erecting many noise barriers, and well, there are pros and cons, because some of the designs might not be very good. So my question is, well, policy-wise, Undersecretary, often the time is after a road has been completed, and when it's found that the noise level is too high. Well, in the past, we have also conducted studies on the surfacing materials to be used, and previously we also said that for the vehicles and also the type of tires, and also even the machinery, and also the engine used. And last time we actually said that some motorists would like to have noisier engines. So can something be done about it, or do you have to go back to the EMSD asking them to consider it? Because the issues involved might be broader. Well, at the universities, they are now conducting studies. Well, probably they might be able to come up with some findings. But then very often we do not distinguish between the two. All right, if we were to use some resources to mitigate the noise, to what extent have we been able to do that? All right, for older roads, of course, nothing can be done about it. And is it that we have limited choices, or we have no choice at all, or we have already tested with different materials for paving the roads and also for the interfacing areas? And last time, it was also mentioned, every time when vehicles move on it, there would be noise generated, in particular during night time, that would be more easily felt. So when it comes to legislation, Madam Chair, or just now I talked about construction noise, and you said that it has to do with development and so on. So these are the issues that I'd like to bring up. Most importantly, well, for some infrastructure projects, if we are fully aware of the problems, because we want to comply with the noise control requirements, so to what extent do we have to spend extra money? Well, in the past, we might not be fully aware of the implications well, for tree planting, we might be told about the implications or the cost concern. But then how about this? Well, the project cost might have gone up very substantially because of that. But then the result might not be very satisfactory. So if that's the case, then should something be done about the alignment instead? But then that has never been highlighted before. So in our community, we are giving more importance to the quality of life and also the living environment. All right, in my profession, all right, as engineers, they might say that is the most easiest and it's engineering wise. But then other costs might also be incurred. For example, like tax code road, very little can be done. And of course, you don't want to be so negative about this, and therefore we always try to come up with ways to mitigate the noise. Well, we may not have the solution right away, but then do we go for it or do we not go for it? And how about our universities? Can they help? All right, they are also researching on the use of different electric cars and so on. All right, I think we are very much a forerunner in this respect. Can something be done about it? Because we are using a lot of resources to mitigate and to remedy the situation. And very often when we discuss infrastructural projects, these might not have been noticed or highlighted. So we just talk about noise or noise nuisance. So I think we have often tried our best already in terms of noise mitigation, and yet the outcome might not be entirely satisfactory. So in this respect, have you done anything about it? Well, Madam Chair, I might not have said much in relation to a particular paragraph. I think it's about the entire paper. All right, for noise barrier is mentioned in para 29, and then for tax code flyover is para 26. Well, just now I was concerned that you might not have warmed up enough, and that's why initially I tried to go through the paper paragraph by paragraph. But then if you have already warmed up enough, then I think we'll just open the floor to the entire paper. You can ask questions in relation to any part of the paper. All right, can I see a raise of hands if you're interested in asking questions? All right, Mr. Chair. All right, both you and I will be dominating the floor. Undersecretary, yes, I understand that this is a rather complex issue, but then if we were to make a comparison, all right, over the past few months, we've been talking about air pollution. I think we can also draw an analogy to that. All right, we talk about end-of-pipe type solution. All right, it's about the emission level. And now for noise, you're also talking about machinery and also vehicles emitting noise. So how do we make use of different technologies and also different pieces of legislation to regulate the situation? You said that, well, some vehicles are trying to make themselves more noisy. All right, this is in breach of the law, and therefore you will have to take enforcement action. And in other cases, we are trying to erect noise barriers to mitigate the noise or to shield off noise. And also at the tertiary level, you're talking about double glazing so that they can also mitigate the noise. And also, to go further, in planning the alignment, we might prevent people or ban people from taking certain action or doing certain things, and that would also reduce noise. So you can ban vehicles from entering a zone. You can also ban vehicles from going into or onto a certain road, and you can also ban certain activities, for example, lion dance or dragon dance and so on. So we may not have discussed those in full yet. So as a city, if we were to implement such end-of-pipe solutions, so you're talking about a process of regulation, and you will have to think about it comprehensively. And therefore, Madam Chair, when you try to conclude on these, you might wish to highlight the issues. That is, at this council or in the community, we have discussed all sorts of issues for many years, and when we try to focus on certain areas, we would have certain constraints. And well, yes, we do have some constraints while we try to or attempt to come up with solutions. But then we should look at it more comprehensively. That is the noise in the city. And also in some areas, noise would only be more intensive. So what other measures will be more helpful in resolving the problem? And if we adopt that approach, that might help us to come up with some solutions. Have I addressed your concerns, Mr. Chair? Indeed, you are indeed on top of the issue. Yes, many issues are involved, and Madam Chair, I'm sure you've experienced that too. All right, there are some buses because it's a stop-and-go situation. That's why the noise is very serious. But then if they can run smoother, then that would also reduce a lot of noise. So that has to do with the sign of the roads and also the living environment, and also, for example, if the bus stops are too close to one another, then the engine has not really run in, and therefore they could become very noisy. So when we look at the issue, we should not single out just one or two things that would not help solve the problem. All right. Let's say if we erect a noise barrier because the noise level is excessive, then it's actually a remedial approach that may not be entirely satisfactory. All right, in designing the infrastructure and also town planning, we should be looking at it from the silencing angle. That's why in many in many of the public works projects papers, we would also be talking about tree planting and so on. But then for noise and so on, we have not really anticipated that, and therefore we can also suggest that in future, when the administration comes up with infrastructure planning, there should also be a noise impact assessment instead of waiting till after the completion of the project, and then residents would file complaints, and then you would try to mitigate the situation. But then in some cases, well, you cannot have the best of both worlds, all right? If it's a residential development, then you're actually having this traffic signal system so that people will be able to cross the roads more easily. But then if the vehicles have to stop and go, then of course they will generate more noise. So sometimes it's a balance between convenience and noise mitigation. So how do we strike a balance? Yes, Madam Chair, I fully agree with what you just said, because very often when we design and planning, yes, if you pass through a particular area, it's just passing by, and in any event it will emit noise. But then in some cases the traffic itself would not be that much. And also because of the timing of that, all right, when you are at rest, then of course you would not be using those transport modes, and therefore it involves it involves many departments and many policies. But then as a minimum requirement, when we go about the infrastructure, because of the cost concerns, all right, how about the noise that might be generated, and how much will have to be spent on mitigating noise? For example, how much more do we have to spend on such mitigation measures? For example, as the chair just said, maybe just planting a few more trees will help. And in other cases, if you design the area better so that the residential units will be farther away from the carriageway, then that might also help. So, Madam Chair, when it comes to infrastructure project planning, well, at least you will have to tell us how much will have to be spent on mitigating the noise, and also what about the materials?
The materials may reduce the noise generated, but it may be more expensive. The community has to be informed on the cost for that. In the past, these features have not been highlighted. But in the past, well, at present, is that we just put a noise barrier if there is a sensitive receiver nearby, a noise-sensitive receiver nearby. So at the end of the day, we build tunnels, not roads. Well, I think we need to factor that in. Yes, when we do our conclusion, we will put these ideas into our conclusion for the Bureau's reference. Members now want to ask questions, so I'll impose a time limit. 3 members are in the line. Next time you better be early. Helena Wong, Wu Chi Wai, and Claudia Mo. Helena Wong. In the district, I think the major source of nuisance is the infrastructural works, say Sha Tin Central Line, the Kwun Tong extension, in Whampoa Gardens. There is piling next to the residential buildings. There are plastic hoardings, but they're still very noisy. And some owners have to sell their flats and go away. They can't stand it. The MTRCL says that there is no exceedance. So do you ask the residents to use some equipment to measure the noise level? Now they have an enclosure, but before they complete the enclosure, they might have already finished the drilling and piling. I don't know how to deal with it, technically speaking. There are other complaints. There are other noise complaints other than construction noise. Say, for example, bars, say in Prince Edward in Mongkok or Central Western District. Councillors received a lot of complaints. There are upstairs bars, there are restaurants and bars on the street level. They operate very late into the night. The patrons are very noisy. When you call the police, the noisemaker may have already gone. And if you complain to the LLB is not responsible for law enforcement. So you need to rely on the police. And when you call, you're just speaking to a voice recorder. People are drinking and making a lot of noise, and the residents are disturbed. Now, I've also heard that upon renewal of a license, the district office will consult the residents. But can we have a provision? If you have a restaurant or bar or bowling alley, your operating hours should not exceed, say, a certain hour, which is regarded to be acceptable, whether it's 12 midnight or what. Then there is no need to conduct consultation, say, the representatives of Whampoa Gardens on whether a certain license, a liquor license should be renewed, and what is the licensing condition, say, for example, opening until 10 or 11 or 12 or 1 in the morning. If you set a rule, say, residential area, no more noise after 12 midnight. I don't know whether that can be considered. If you say that's an entertainment district and there are no residential units nearby, then that's another matter. I don't know whether I've made use of all my time, whether they will answer in writing. That's about the individual visit scheme. In fact, there are, say, shops, say in To Kwa Wan, selling chocolates to mainland visitors, which is the ground floor. On the first floor is a restaurant for the visitors. Day and night, thousands of people gathering there, and there is illegal parking, and there are many coaches. And then with the mainlanders come the Falun Gong people, and then with Falun Gong people come the anti-Falun Gong people. Just outside Main Fai building, wheelchair users cannot go in and cannot go out, not to say the residents living in Main Fai building and nearby. Loads and loads of passengers come, visitors come, and then they make a lot of noise from the morning till night. I really don't know how to deal with that. I don't know whether the Undersecretary has any good advice. Well, these are human behavior, and the Environmental Bureau, is not responsible for that. It doesn't deal with religion, it doesn't deal with liquor license, it doesn't deal with tourism. I don't know whether you will ask the relevant bureaus to look into this matter. Now, if it is something under the Environment Bureau, say, for example, construction equipment, the noise emitted by construction equipment. That is something the EPD can deal with. Directly. Now, if the Falun Gong people come and they will do their practice, and then there's music as well. Now, concerning construction noise, the construction sites do affect the residents to a certain extent, and some construction sites may be close to residential units, for example, the MTR stations. The only comfort is that the sites will not be always there. And during the works period, there is bound to be nuisance to a certain extent. Usually, many projects are conducted underground as far as possible. They will not take up the road service. They will, even if we work on the drains, we adopt a boring approach. But anyways, we need to build some shafts, somewhere. And when boring, usually boring is done at sites where stations are to be built. Usually, they will cover the work sites. Concerning, the MTR stations, usually they will cover the work sites, but sometimes the site may be very big. Say the station itself, it is too big to be covered. So they will make use of the quiet equipment. They will also deploy movable noise barriers to reduce the noise nuisance. We hope that further improvements can be made. Say, for example, better noise barriers, more quiet equipment. We've been to Japan to look at more quiet equipment, and we will follow the matter up with the construction sector. We hope that we can do something about it. As for bars, it's really a headache. And there are two things. First, the noise inside the bar. It is controlled by us. And under certain, on a certain occasion, the music may affect other people. And there is also structural borne vibration, which affect people living in upper floors. We think we are confident. We are confident that we can deal with that. And usually the bars deal with that. They have, say, double doors. They reduce vibration. They put up pads and noise-absorbing materials on and around the loudspeakers. I think the most serious headache is the noise emitted by patrons outside the bar. They are talking outside the bar. They smoke outside the bar. And there is also traffic noise. And then I think that can only be dealt with by the license and the police. Well, of course, we can say no more business after 12 midnight, but that's only our view. Usually, we work through the Liquor Licensing Board and the police, and also the relevant policy bureau. I agree that this kind of noise nuisance from bars is still a problem. And the LLB also has to consider the conditions, and the licensing conditions are subject to appeal. If the conditions are set not reasonably or effectively, the condition may be overthrown by an appeal. Say, I heard that say they impose a condition of no more selling of liquor after 11 p.m., but such a condition has been overthrown. in an appeal. Yes, on construction site, I will ask the EPD to help. As for the conditions imposed on a site, say for example, noise barriers, working hours, I hope such conditions will be given to district councillors so that they can relay such conditions to the residents. And there are complaint hotlines. And if you let people know what conditions are to be observed, then people can make complaints if conditions are breached. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Well, you cannot have the cake and eat it. As far as public policy is concerned, we want infrastructure, we want convenience, and we want quietness. And if you want it to be quiet, then the facility will have to be very far away. Now, if the background noise is very, if the background noise level is very quiet, people may even complain against frogs croaking during springtime. Now, at present, the cap is set at 70 decibels. This standard has been adopted for over a very long time. Are you going to tighten the standard? Say, if you cut it from 70 to 68, that will be that may be a big change. So I just want to know whether you will tighten the limit. If so, what is your thinking? And what is the timetable? If the answer is no, what's the reason? Does it mean that 70 decibel is all that people can do with available technology? As for noise barrier, according to the Transport Department, if traffic noise is very high, then the Transport Department will provide the noise barrier. But noise barriers cannot be built on every stretch of the road because of loading or structural matters. Now, that is new technology. Now, the Housing Department and the PolyU have jointly developed double-glazed windows, which can maintain good ventilation and keep out noise. So I just want to know whether such windows can be provided if noise cannot be reduced by other means.
For example, if schools are subject to such noise nuisance, then air conditioning and also double glazing windows would also be installed for the schools. So can that be considered? Or else there is no way that we can completely resolve the problem, because objectively, being a busy city, there is bound to be noise, unless you're talking about motorists trying to retrofit their vehicles with noisier engines. Well, I understand that it's very common for some motorists to do this, and when police intercept such vehicles, well, have you given them any instructions? And if they have done any alterations illegally, then would that be penalty? So I've never seen that being enforced. So for that part of the law, is it that in terms of enforcement, it has never been stringently enforced, or have you ever enforced it at all? All right, I'll say a few words, and then I'll defer to Mr. Yang, who will give you more details. Well, there are three main parts. First, on 70 decibel as the acceptable noise level. All right, for roads, it's not a statutory requirement. It's just a threshold that we decide whether or not residential dwellings would be affected. Well, we have to look at the actual situation on the ground, and then Mr. Young will tell you more later. And in the ordinance, there are other requirements. For example, is it for residential use or commercial use or what? So for different uses, there would be different statutory requirements, and also in terms of the timing. For example, during night time, it has to be more quiet and so on. Just now, you also refer to, all right, for new roads, well, we'll try to do better planning so that we'll make sure that the nuisance caused by the roads would be minimized. For example, on low noise servicing, and also the alignment will also have to be such that the road would be farther away from residential dwelling. But then for the roads that have already been completed, but then because of some structural problems, we cannot erect noise barriers on them, or if the vehicles are actually in a stop-and-go mode. So even if you pave it with no low noise materials, they can also subject to wear and tear very soon, and therefore very little can be done about it. So in those situations, can the residential units be retrofitted with noise mitigating installations like double glazing and so on? Yes, we are actually looking into that, and we've been working with the housing department in doing this. But then in some cases, we will have to look further. Well, the buildings department does have its own requirement. For example, we don't want people to close the windows all the time and then have their air conditioners turn on even during winter. We don't want that to happen. We do want the windows to remain open sometimes, because that would also improve air ventilation, but then at the same time it should not be too noisy. But then that would be rather challenging. And during the past few years, some progress has been made, and we hope that we can go even further. And Mr. Young is the expert, so I'll defer to him. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Member, for your question. All right, you also referred to the standards, and Mr. Tang also referred to 70 decibel. Basically, it's a planning standard for traffic noise. And then through the EIA, and also under the HKPSG with regard to the alignment of roads, and also distance from residential units, we hope to be able to comply with that. But then there are some difficulties. For example, at crossroads, because of traffic safety, we cannot just erect a very big noise barrier or enclosure to cover the entire road. And sometimes because the residential units are too close to the roads, and if you have an enclosure, then that would cover the entire road, and it's pretty difficult. So planning-wise, we do face many challenges, but then in terms of alignment and also in terms of paving it with noise-absorbing materials and so on, we do we are able to comply with the 70 decibel threshold in most cases. But then, given the intensity of the, or given the build-up area or the density of development in Hong Kong is rather difficult. But then in the UK, in Australia, and in Europe, actually Hong Kong's situation is almost one of the most densely developed places in Asia, and therefore we are adopting the World 10 standard. In other words, the top 10% of development when compared to the US and the UK is already the same. But then in terms of the size of the area, all right, in the UK at least they have some rural areas, all right, even if it's a suburb of London, it's already not as densely populated or densely developed as London City. And therefore, in terms of planning, we do have a lot more difficulties than they have. And I think we have already done our best in line with the situation in Hong Kong. And in recent years, we are actually looking at how we can mitigate the situation with the use of technology. And there isn't much more that we can do. in terms of mitigating noise, because in some cases the roads are really too close to residential units, and wherever possible we will try to submerge the road so that the road traffic will go underground. Yes, the infrastructure is there, but then in terms of we have to balance the two. That is how are we going to protect the environment while ensuring that development can take place. And also on existing roads in the past for many years, before the coming into play of the EPD, indeed we can see that some roads are right next to residential units. I can still remember there were certain clips for vehicles that have broken down on the highways, and they could just knock on the windows of the residential unit asking them to place a call with the police reporting their cases. But then for a long while now, we are actually working on how we can mitigate the situation. Yes, there are some difficulties. For example, for flyovers, we have to ensure that they are able to support the extra structure, and you will also have to ensure that there is enough space for the erection of such noise barriers. And in some cases, there are also some underground utilities. It's not just costly to retrofit it with further noise barriers. And in some cases, there are also shops beneath the flyover, and therefore it's not possible. And also we try to use some noise-absorbing materials in paving the roads, but then for the larger vehicles, like heavy vehicles and buses, when they run on such roads, that would also result in more wear and tear, because for the noise-absorbing materials, 20% of them would be porous, and therefore the structural force that they can sustain would not be too large, and therefore what we are trying to do is to work with the Highways Department in improving the use of materials. But then, the progress that has been made has been limited. Yes, we have been able to reduce the vibration that might be generated when vehicles run on those roads. But then there are still many challenges. And also, we are also trying our best to follow the state-of-the-art technology internationally. And also you talk about noise mitigating windows. We are actually trying to do this. That is, even if you do not close the windows entirely, you will still be able to mitigate the noise. And PolyU and the Buildings Department have also been working on that. We will conduct further research on that. Other than that, together with the Housing Department, we have also developed some noise mitigating balconies. And that would only be applicable to certain specified cases. And we are looking at overseas studies together with some local studies. We hope that we can work hand in hand, and we can adopt a multi-pronged approach in trying to resolve the problem in order to bring a better living environment to the residents. That's what we have been trying. All right, please be brief. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There are 2 points. After listening to the official's explanation, apparently you're looking into different options. For the 70 decibel threshold, can you give us more details? And also for the Housing Department's, ventilating windows, will you consider applying this to places where noise barriers cannot be erected? Can that be installed for the residents? So it's not just about whether or not you're looking into it, because for the Housing Department, in Sanpo Kong, in the new construction site, they're going to use such windows in order to mitigate the noise. So all units will be retrofitted with that. All right, I think it's almost time for us to move on to the next item. If there are no further questions, then we'll leave it at that. With regard to the public expenditure on that, if you still want to ask further questions, then please have your questions ready, and then we can pass them on to the administration so that they can prepare for a reply, and then they'll be able to answer the questions more efficiently. All right, next. Let's move on to the next item. That's air quality modeling in Hong Kong. We have 2 academics who will be sharing their views with us. Let's invite the 2 academics to join us. And EPD officials, thank you very much for coming.
歡迎兩位教授。好。
Welcome to the two professors for sparing your time to come and help us with our discussion on air quality modeling. First of all, I'd like to introduce the two professors to you. One is Dr. Nicky Lam from the City U. He's a visiting assistant professor of the School of Energy and Environment. The other one is Professor Fong Chi Hong. He's a professor from the Institute for the Environment from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Yes, Undersecretary. Yes, I'm sure members might wish to know a bit more about the modeling and what kind of model have we adopted. And Madam Chair, in convening this meeting, I'm sure you'd like to take a look at how overseas models would be using this model. What I'd like to say is, well, if we were to understand all these models in greater detail, in fact, the EPD knows them all, including the two professors seated opposite to us. And I understand you've also invited other professors, but then they have not been able to come today. But then this is a relatively small group of people, and this is a relatively technical subject. And for the government's model, recently, we have also exchanged views with some overseas experts as to how they can be further refined. And we'll tell you more about the refining process. And I'm sure, the professors might be fully aware of that because we've been working jointly with them on some of the models. All right, for the models themselves, they are too technical, and therefore I do not wish to bother you with all the details. But then secondly, as to how we can further refine them, and after the enhancement or refining, well, some of the friends out there would also think that the transparency can also be further enhanced, and I'm sure they've already elaborated on that in their submissions. So in the course of our discussion today, you can see that we've already reached a certain consensus, and also behind the modeling, there are certain assumptions and how we can enhance the transparency further. I'm sure members of the public and members would also very much like to know issues about these. And as a start, can I ask Mr. Mock to give you a bit of the background? Yes, I might be a little cumbersome here. I forgot to introduce the officials here because the Undersecretary and Mr. Mock are raw familiar faces to us. But then for the third official, here's Mr. Dave Ho. He's the Principal Environmental Protection Officer, Air Science from the EPD. And then we also have Mr. Leung Kai Ming. He's also a Senior Science Officer from the EPD, and also Dr. Fong Si Chong. He's also a Senior Environmental Protection Officer on Air Science from the EPD. So today we do have many academics and scientists here. So this is a subcommittee where we can learn most in terms of new knowledge and new science.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mock. Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is a very technical topic. I hope that in my briefing, members can be given a general understanding what is meant by air quality modeling in Hong Kong, what exactly the air quality model is. Now, in our air quality modeling system, one is the approach, the other is the mathematical model. In fact, our model is similar to that of other advanced countries. As for the modeling approach, how I think you're concerned about the emission of different sources. What are the principles? There are 2 points. Now, the administration implement one measure after another and conducts consultation on such measures. Does it mean that such measures can be put into the air quality models? Now, we would ask the item proponents to consider measures that have been implemented by the administration. Say, for example, the $10 billion for replacement of diesel vehicles. Would that be implemented? We really don't know. So this policy will not be incorporated in the EIA as an assumption. And only when it is implemented and when there is a timetable, then that assumption will be incorporated in the EIA assessment. In making projections or estimates, the proponent has to adopt representative data for making the emission assessment. In assessing the impact on air quality, we follow international practice. Now, the source may be the project itself. The emissions may come from the project itself. The sources may come from the sources may be outside the project. We're talking about two sources, say the project itself, and then the sources that may that have a significant contribution on the receptors, but outside the project. And then the third tier is the sources of the background, so to speak, say, for example, the Pearl River Delta region. And we need to look at these three tiers in assessing air quality. As for air quality models, it is quite, there are several models. And they are mathematical models or mathematical formulae. And they says that they take into account the physiochemical processes in air pollution. That these physiochemical processes will affect the concentration of pollution, and after a series of calculations, they come up with a number, or they come up with an outcome. Now, there are three sources of pollution in the international community. With regard to the first tier, the emission from the proposed project, and tier 2 sources from the vicinity, they are measured by the Lagrangian models. Well, I do not explain the Lagrangian models. When you come to the foreign names of the models, then please, you can use English. Well, I'm not going to explain that because the doctors will can speak hours on these models. If we consider Pearl River Delta region, the area is very big. The physiochemical scenarios will be very complicated, and therefore the Eulerian models are adopted. As for Lagrangian models, overseas regulatory authorities have built them. And these models have included many conservative factors or elements to make sure that these models are suitable for conducting air quality impact assessments. These models have been widely applied in the international community, and in fact we are using that as well. The US EPA, United States Environmental Protection Agency, is the one that produces many such models. Well, what about the Pearl River Delta? You may have heard about the PATH model. In 2011, we got our advisors to do that. They take into account meteorological factors, topographical factors, chemical factors, and we've got internationally renowned experts to validate such a model. We are now upgrading the PATH to extend its geographical coverage, its spatial resolution, and also the various chemical calculations, such as whether it's affected by nitrogen or organic compounds, so on and so forth. The model will provide us with more information. Whether it's the current path model or the new generation path, which is now being worked on, they are based on the same scientific basis. Recently, we have met with academics who work on air quality modeling, including the two experts who are present today. We talked to them on our present air quality model. And they have agreed on the following things. First, concerning the categorization of the sources into 3 tiers in air quality assessment, they are agreeable to that. They also agree that the path has a solid scientific foundation and it is suitable for assessing air quality. Perhaps I will stop here in my introduction, and I'm happy to take questions. Okay, if members don't have questions for the time being, anyways, we want to listen to the views of the academics before we put our questions to the relevant representatives. So, the professors, would you like to give us a briefing? Yes, Professor Lam. Well, I have prepared an English version of my submission, but I'll try to brief you in Chinese. We agree with Mr. Mok on the 3-tier system. The only thing we don't find it okay is that in the old path is still in the EIA process. The old path is outdated. If they implement a new path, then the 3-tier system will be in compliance with up-to-date technology in scientific terms and engineering terms. Although the quality of the modeling is adequate, we need to understand several things. Number one, whether people trust the air quality modeling, and whether that is adequate data transparency. If members of the public want to know more, are we able to provide them with the information? In overseas countries, such information is posted online. When I was a student, I searched on the internet and learned such modeling and learned such information. When I returned to Hong Kong, I go to the EPD website and I'm not able to find the information I need. I think transparency has to be enhanced in this regard. Now, since it is for EIA, the path model assumptions usually are shown to the public. And the public can discuss these assumptions, and they know what the administration is doing. What the government is doing to a certain extent is up to the current technology, but members of the public don't have such information. The information prepared by the EPD should be made available because people have the right to know. It is taxpayers' money. That, as far as the U.S. EPA is concerned, that's their position. As for the emission inventory, when academics want to have such emission inventory for verification, this is usually allowed, and you will get the endorsement of the academics. Then the public will have more confidence in the government. If the NGOs have questions about certain government policies as to whether the policies are workable or not, and if nobody can check it, then how can you convince the public that the modeling is right or not? In the United States, they do update the environmental policy from time to time. Would there be a time schedule for routine update of such policy matters, so that the public know that, say, the model is updated once every so many years? That's the summary of what I want to say. Thank you, Dr. Lam. Professor Fong, please. I thank the LegCo for inviting me to comment on air quality modeling. Air pollution is very serious in Hong Kong. People's health is affected. People are concerned whether air quality modeling in Hong Kong is able to protect health of Hong Kong through the prediction of air quality modeling. In fact, air quality modeling is nothing new. The colleagues on the other side of the chamber have already told you that different countries have adopted air quality modeling. And in my report, I mentioned how UK makes use of air quality models to implement their emission reduction policies. I think the EPD is doing similar things. The accuracy of the models is not just built on accurate science. It also relies on the emission inventory, and also the boundaries, and also the future emission inventory. The assumptions have to be spelled out clearly. Now, the difference of the current situation and the EIA reports may reflect the differences between the assumptions and also the EIA and also the emission inventories. In future, the assumptions of the sources and also the assumptions of the inventory should be directly linked to the government's policy. In the past, information is not very complete. Now, if you need to make the public to believe that the EIA report is credible, then all these assessments and assumptions have to be listed very clearly.
And under the current EIA system, the information is not very clear, and as a result, members of the public are not very clear about this, and therefore I believe that there is room for improvement. So I think the most important point is that is about the transparency of the EIA system. That's of critical importance, and therefore I hope that the administration can make some improvements in that area. All right, I'll pause here. Thank you. The floor is now open to members. First, Dennis Kwok. No one else is in the queue, and therefore there is no time limit. All right, Dennis, Madam Chair, then we can have more time for discussion. And first of all, I'd like to thank the two experts for coming. I've also read your submissions. And any time that you'd like to intercept, please feel free to do so. Yes. Well, I fully agree with the importance of transparency. That's the reason why I propose this, because for past model in every EIA study is playing a very important role, in particular when it comes to air quality. Well, it's really the most important EIA mechanism for air quality, and we don't quite understand how come after the past study, how come they are able to meet the requirements under the AQO. Because if you look at the specific data, it should not have passed it. But then after they've adopted the pass model, how come they have managed to pass it? So what kind of data have you input into the system? And also for the pass model, what have you done in terms of the assumptions? So what model assumptions have been used? So for many studying EIA reports for years, including the experts from the Hong Kong U, I've discussed with them many times, and they do not understand it, and they are not able to understand it very thoroughly. That's why when it comes to the conclusion of the EIA report, very often many experts will have a lot of reservations. Well, as far as I'm aware, for the study brief for some projects, it would require the project proponent to submit emission inventory data to the EPD. Have I understood it correctly? Is that the case? Yes, Mr. Mock. Can you answer the question first? Can you help? Well, I understand that in the study brief, you would often require the project proponent to provide some inventory data. So whatever input inventory data, you will have to provide that set of data to the EPD. Is that right? All right. Thank you for the question. I'll be brief in my reply, and when necessary, my colleague Kenneth can supplement. Well, the two professors both mentioned this, and in fact, they're also referring to the same point as Mr. Kwok. It's about transparency or otherwise of the system. And of course, Mr. Kwok, you also referred to another point. It's about the assumptions for the pass model and whether it's transparent enough. All right, I'll touch on that later. But then apparently you're saying that, well, all right, in the model assessment, one of the most important factors is the emission. But then how do you make the projection? And can you enhance the transparency in particular in the future? Can you improve it? Well, Mr. Kwok, you also said that, well, for some people, all right, I've looked at your past model, and originally you should not have been able to meet the requirements. How come they've finally passed the test? Well, there are 2 points that I'd like to make here. Well, if they have not done the calculation themselves, or if they have not conducted any scientific analysis of all the data, and to suggest that they should have passed or not passed the AQO, well, it's not scientific. All right, even if I've completed the past study, it may not be entirely scientific because it depends on the assumptions. Well, there are certain criteria that I referred to just now. For example, if I remember it correctly, Dr. Fong also referred to it. That is, how do you align the policy with the emission? And as I said just now, one point that is very important is when our colleagues scrutinize an EIA report, well, they attach a lot of importance to this. That is, with regard to the assumption for the emission levels. Yes, when we talk about these things, well, after all, it's the EPD that will be looking into that. And will the public be kept in the dark? No, that's not true, because these assumptions would also have to be included in the EIA report by the proponent of the project. But then probably because there is too much information in the report, we've talked to the experts, because if there is too much information, then it might be difficult for people to identify certain pieces of information from the report, given the big pile of information. And therefore, as we said to the experts earlier, for example, can we provide an executive summary, so that in the executive summary, can we single out those data to facilitate reading by the readers? Because for the emission model, is it reasonable? Well, it depends on whether or not the assumptions are reasonable. Well, that would be rather subjective. So, as I said, if we have a very sound and solid policy basis for the administration to come up with mitigation measures, then this is objective, right? All right, if I go about a particular development project and there might be emission sources, but then they would definitely have certain capacity that have been planned in, So they do have this design value. And as I said, also, if you take certain or carry out certain work procedures, then certain emission factors would also be worked in. For example, will the same factors be involved in carrying out a particular work procedure? Well, that would also be included in the EIA report. But then the thing is it easy for you to identify such information from the report given the size of the report? So in this regard, Kenneth, Dr. Leung might be able to supplement. Yes, I'll just supplement on this. First, on the scrutiny process of the EIA report, as Mr. Mok just said, every step of the way, we would require the proponent to make it very clear. That is for the estimated activity level, the nature of the activity. I can cite an example. For example, on the emission by vehicles, he will have to tell me how many vehicles are expected to run on a particular section of the road. And also, it's not just about the number of vehicles. It's about the kinds of vehicles that will be running on the roads. For example, we have a dozen or so vehicles, and they will have to give us the distribution or the ratio of individual types. And then for a detailed EIA report, we will have to have an estimate around the clock. Well, are you referring to the Lagrangian model or the Eulerian model? Well, under the Eulerian model, that would be applied in the past. So you're referring to the Lagrangian model? Yes. As Mr. Mok just said, there are 3 levels. The first is a project emission itself. Well, for the EIA study, well, the project emission itself would have the biggest impact on these receivers nearby. That's why we will attach most importance to this, because if this tier 1 source, if it's not done properly, then all the sensitive receivers assessment will be very poor, or it might not be able to meet our requirements. So the first example that we gave was about the checklist on the project emission. You will have to do a very good job. And also for the surrounding sources of emission, that would also have to be as detailed as the one on the project emissions. So our requirements are really very stringent. And after taking the first 2 steps, basically, we are looking at the 500 meter radius of the project area. So we would also apply the same set of standards in making the projection. And then after you've applied such stringent standards in doing the assessment, so for basically you have already completed a checklist of emission, so that you'll be able to make the most stringent assessment on the most sensitive receiver. And then for pass is applied to tier 3 sources or background emissions. So for these, the distance would be somewhat farther away from the project location, and the EPD has already come up with a basic emission checklist, and therefore for ordinary project proponent, they do not have to make too many variations to these factors. Is that publicly available? Is that in the public domain? Well, for all the data that are used, for example, for a power plant's emission, well, what's the estimate? Basically, all the information has already been uploaded onto the web. It's in the public domain, yes. But let me give a few more details. For example, some members also asked about the EIA report that was compiled 10 years ago. Apparently, there is a discrepancy with the actual situation on the ground. Well, let me clarify. Well, for projects using PATH, the first project is the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge. So that was in 2005-06. In other words, we only adopted PATH as the projection model since 2005-06, and therefore 10 years ago we did not have PATH yet. And what did we use? Well, for background projection, we used the data from the air quality monitoring stations data. And if you look at the data collected by the air quality monitoring station 10 odd years ago, well, there is a huge discrepancy because some of the background data have been changed significantly. For example, on ozone, because well, back in 1999 or 1997, the level of ozone emission was not that high, and therefore we use that as a background, and then we make an assumption or projection into the situation 10 or more years down the road. Because we adopted a relatively conservative approach, the assumption was that the situation would not have deteriorated so badly, and therefore we try to use a known environmental data to project into the future, and that was allowed in the previous past modeling. So that was the worst case scenario. I'd like to barge in here. Well, when it comes to the worst case scenario, well, many experts think that it would be more reliable, because if you don't know what the assumptions are for projecting into the future 10 or 15 years down the road, because there were many assumptions, you're thinking that air quality would be improving, in particular background air quality would be improving. That's why for many projects they've been able to pass the AQO test. But then for experts in the past, they've told me that if you use background air quality and if you use the air quality monitoring stations data, then at least they have something to rely on, and that would be more reliable, because they've already looked at the worst case scenario. You're assuming that the air quality, when compared to what's going to happen 10 or 15 years down the road, there would not be significant improvement, and under these circumstances, would you still be able to pass the AQO test? Well, the worst case scenario is that there would be no improvement at all, but then, well, that's not in line with the control policy of the Bureau, and Mr. Mock can also supplement later. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, what I'd like to say here is when we make an assessment on background pollution, if we were to adopt the current approach, that is, we would only input the data from the air quality monitoring station, is that a realistic assessment? And if you agree, like the academics have agreed, that the existing past model, all right, there is a sound scientific basis for us to come up with a model on the physiochemical situation in the ambient background. That is for pollutants that will be emitted in the future. What's the situation going to be like? As you are aware, we do have this emission reduction target. We are actually trying to reduce emission ourselves. That's why for the known data collected from an established policy, and if that is used to help us project into the future, that would be more realistic. That's why we said that, well, after we have adopted this approach, and when we look at other places, in fact, they are also of the view that this would be a more desirable approach. But then, of course, there might be some people, I don't know who they are, they might say that, all right, if we adopt the old system, that is, we just assume that both governments are not going to do anything at all, and we are actually looking into the future with a worst case scenario. Well, the two comparisons might not be entirely appropriate. All right, in the project brief, the proponent can use a background air quality. They can also use a past model, and they can also do both, right? And if they do both, and also under the past model, if some of the assumptions are done that way, will you be able to come up with the worst case scenario even under past? Because, well, for past, we just talk about some of the assumptions, and you're assuming that both governments would be able to achieve the target entirely, or is there any situation whereby the past model can be adjusted in such a way, all right, there can be an assumption that it can only meet 50% of the target. So can you have this plus or minus margin? Is that possible?
If I may add a little bit, as said by Kenneth, EPD will build a path model. We don't do it for every year. We may do it in a certain year. Say recently, together with Guangdong province, we have the Pearl River Delta region emission reduction project until 2020. So we put the figure of our estimate for 2020 into path. There is no room for, say, reducing the emission by or achieving the target by 50%. Now, earlier on in November, we reported to the LegCo our target was a range. Our targets were a range of numbers. Say for SO2, our target is 35% to 75%, NOx 20% to 30%, particulates 15 to 30%. So we adopt the lower bound assumption. Say for SO2, 35 to 75%, we put 35% into path. We don't put an aggressive number. To be specific, what are the measures in terms of vessels? Now we may legislate, say, to require the vessels to change their fuel when they berth. But we cannot assume that the whole PRD will become a low-emission area. Same for power generation plants. We will not make an aggressive assumption, say 50% by nuclear energy. We will put in a conservative assumption. Say by 2020, we have such assumptions. Basing on our agreement with Guangdong and the government's measures, the 10 billion replacement project, vehicle replacement project, is not included in the path. As for data transparency, we've talked to the academics, the green groups, and experts. We brief them on this topic, and the academics are of the view that PATH has a solid foundation, scientific foundation. The question is about the assumptions. Probably not too many people know about it. Concerning the information in PATH, can that be open to public? Absolutely, and we are working on this. PATH itself is a complicated model. There are tens of thousands of pieces of data. Ordinary people don't understand it. And PATH cannot be used in an ordinary desktop computer. Usually, the academics, the researchers, the professionals, and also EIA companies are able to deal with that. In fact, these users have access to our data. You can ask the experts and professors. You mean the basic information? No, the data, the emission data. Overa, of course, have the data, right? Let me speak on the assumptions. These data can be given to them. As for members of public, there is too much information for the public. If academics want to get the data, if they can give us the hard disk, we can give a copy of the data to them. We've never refused giving them any data. Now, even Hong Kong, the colleagues of the Hong Kong U, they read the PATH report, they don't understand it because of the issue of transparency. Yes, you can get the data, all the data. The majority of the consultants do not know the assumptions. Your predictions from 2010, yes, we have the data, we have the emission of 2010 and 2020. They are given to us, but I want to ask why the emission has declined that much. What are your assumptions? That is not forthcoming. We hope that through today's meeting, transparency can be enhanced. Just as the colleagues have said, such information will be made available. Now we are told what assumptions have been made, basing on what policy. Therefore, by 2020, the emission is at that level. Then we can run PATH, and the outcome of PATH, of running the model, is this, then people will have more confidence. Now, the data are there, but how the data come about, not too many people know about it, except the colleagues sitting opposite to me. And that's why academics, green groups, or even consultants are not able to know why these sets of emission are put in the path model. Now, concerning the document provided by the two academics, they are rather short, but the two experts have both mentioned the question of transparency. Now, since Mr. Ho says that you give them a flash memory stick, and since this is not business sensitive, though it's very complicated, tens of thousands of data, but even if it's put on the internet, it's not very expensive. If you just put it on the internet, you don't need to wait for the academics or even amateurs who come to you to copy the information. So the first question is, what is the difficulty of putting it on the internet? The second question is something arising from Dr. Feng's paper. 3 paragraphs, the third paragraph, counting from the bottom. You have these policies and assumptions, and whether such policies have been implemented and whether there have been changes. There are 8 questions altogether. And there is also a related question concerning the study brief. The emission inventory files have to be given to you, and then you will check whether the consultants, the proponents, consultants' data are correct. Such information is not available to the public. I believe such files should be open to the public as well. Dr. Lam, concerning the point raised by Mr. Kwok concerning the observation data used as a worst-case scenario, if you look at a developing country or developed country, the emission is declining. Say in China has a 12-5-year plan, and the emission will decline. If you look at the U.S. emission trend, it is declining. If you base observation data as a worst-case scenario, to a certain extent, that is unrealistic. As for the assumptions of the path model, Guangdong may have an emission reduction policy. If you look at the actual situation, if you look at 10 years ago, they asked for reduction by so many percent. They have not achieved that target. So will you take into account that the target should be discounted before putting into the path model to make the path model more realistic? I think that's the question for the EPD. You should give a discount to the target when you put these into the model. Mr. Mok, there are many questions raised. Yes, well, perhaps let me advance this point. The administration should give a written reply to the written submissions of the 2 academics. And after we've received that, then we will send the replies to you. Yes, we are working on that. Chairman, if I may respond to the points made, and then my colleagues will respond in greater detail. At the start, there is the question of path. Nobody questioned the science of the path model. As said by Professor Fong, there are data for 2020. They know the data, but they don't know how the data come about. In fact, we did provide certain explanations. Say we will implement it. Well, we have implemented certain measures, and therefore this emission target is achieved. We believe that the academics are interested in knowing how we have such an outcome, how we work out these outcomes. Members of the public may not be interested in knowing the process in depth, just like the formula in the model. Just like the formulae in the model, members of the public may have interest. But even if they are not interested, it doesn't bar you from putting them in on the internet. We don't want members of the public to feel that since it's so complicated, they don't need to know, or they don't want to know. Well, I will speak on it from a policy aspect. At the start, the principle behind the proposals of the two professors are acceptable to us. We have no objection to that. We are optimizing improving the path model, and we are working on the model with experts outside the department. So scientifically, the scientific base is recognized. As for the EPD has been releasing data, and such data are used by the academics. The question is, they have the data, but they don't have the basis. Your Chinese has improved. Your Chinese has improved substantially. Now the issue before us is how can there be greater transparency in the process? I believe certain data, no matter how complicated or how voluminous they are, we shouldn't make an assumption that members of the public are not interested in it. I don't think my colleagues mean this. Now, during the scientific discussion, members of the public want to have independent experts to digest such information and then send a message to the public that things put there are correct. Now, the two professors tell us that in other places they have verification process. They get outsiders to do the validation or verification, and they can say that these assumptions, these calculations are in line with modern-day technology and are reasonable. But this is not easy. Say, for example, there are certain things that are not easy to deal with. Say, for example, how much discount should I give to the target to be achieved by the mainland?
But if we exchange our views with the experts, those might not be regarded as very accurate. But then we can only say that it's reasonable. But then in some cases, the discrepancy might be rather wide. Well, what I was trying to say was, well, on the past, the emission could be 100% taken into account, but then we can also come up with another case projection, so that there might be a 30%, there might be a 20% or 40% discount, so that in the event that the emission reduction target in the mainland has not been met, and if the situation is worse than expected, then we would at least have been able to incorporate that worst case scenario in our projection. Well, I'm no expert in this area, and therefore I'm not trying to argue with you about how many options are available in doing this. But then all I'm trying to say is that if we were to choose the way to do it, then when compared to the ultimate emission level, there might be a discrepancy. All right. Some of the assumptions might not have been entirely accurate. But then policy-wise, we have already taken a decision. That is, we will try to refine it. And number 2, we'll try to make it public. And number 3, we are also working with the experts so that we can establish a new relationship with the experts so that we can have this kind of verification work done. So policy-wise, our stance is very clear. We understand what Mr. Kwok and other experts are saying for many years. They hope that mechanisms can be established to verify what's being done so that the models can be more accurate and also can be more transparent. That's all we are trying to do. Sorry, Professor Fong would like to say a few words, so to respect our guests, I'll let him have the floor first. Yes, for the simple data, like in 2010, all right, between 2010 and 2020, if you can provide us with the emission database, for example, that's your projection, and based on certain assumption, you're able to reduce emission by a certain percentage, and also for chimneys, because of certain factors, you're able to reduce the emission by a certain percent. So if you can provide such a simple data, then at least the public can have confidence in your emission target or emission reduction target of 10%, then they will see if it's reasonable or not reasonable. So for such simple data, I'm sure the public will be able to understand them. But then even for us now, well, you have this database and that database, but then even we will have difficulty in telling whether such assumption is reasonable, because we have no idea as to what extent you're able to reduce emission. Yes, the consultant might have done a lot of things, adding things up and so on, and then they can come up with this data, and then they'll just approach the EPD whether or not we have been able to reduce emission by this level. But then I must admit that it's not easy to obtain the information under the current mechanism. All right, Dr. Fong has already made it very clear for emission inventory data. Well, for the proponent who has given you the data, why can't they be disclosed to the public? I'm not suggesting that everything will have to be attached to the EIA report. But then if a green group says that, all right, can you give me the data provided by the proponent on the emission inventory data? If I want to give it to Professor Fong to check if it's acceptable, then why can't I do it? So please consider that, because that would provide many people with the additional confidence that your past model has not been prepared arbitrarily. All right, for this technical memorandum that is already very outdated, why do we have to talk about the worst case scenario? Because under para 4.3.1b5, you talk about worst case scenario is one of the requirements. So what's meant by worst case scenario? Of course, it means that when you predict into the future, in terms of air quality, the situation would be more or less the same as the present level, or just a little better. So that's the worst case scenario. So you will be using the same background air quality, and that's already the worst case scenario. And of course, as the professor just said, that might be unrealistic, because the situation might have improved somewhat, but then you will have to tell people that, all right, despite the many reduction measures, if you're not able to achieve the target, then what the situation is going to be, and that's the requirement under the technical memorandum. Another question is also rather technical. All right, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. For the different pieces of data, that would also be included in the EIA. That's why for A, B, C, the components would be causing some level of pollution. But then would I be able to tell to what extent would they be causing more pollution? Yes, Dr. Lam. All right, I'll be looking at Tier 1, 2, 3 first. Well, under the EIA report, we'll be requiring them to provide us with the cumulative impact, and by that we try to add up Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, and then in the general report they would just provide you with the end result of adding all three together, because in the study brief there is no clear requirement as to how they do the presentation. It's a question of presentation because the data are already there. It's not just a question of a presentation, because if you just tell us the cumulative impact is not going to be meaningful. Well, in the newer reports that you've seen, all right, they've been released and the public will be able to see. And you can see that Tier 1, 2, 3 have already been segregated. So it depends on the project itself and the emission from the project and also the impact of that. So in approving the EIA report, that's a very important factor to consider. And also in the study brief, there would be this worst case scenario. What by that we mean? We have to be very careful about this. We are referring to the project itself. Well, Tier 1 and 2. So Tier 1 is the project itself, and Tier 2 is the nearest receivers. Well, the two academics would know that, as I said, the biggest impact would be from the nearest emission sources. I'm sure the public should be able to understand, all right, within a 1 kilometer radius, and also, well, for the sources from 10 kilometers away, the impact would be very different, and therefore, much of the emphasis would be placed on the near distance emission sources. That's why under Tier 1 and Tier 2, we would require them to come up with the worst case scenario projection. For example, for emission from vehicles, well, we would not allow them to use the design speed in the assessment. For example, there is a highway and the design speed is 50 kilometers per hour. We will ask them to calculate the actual speed. It may be 30 or 20 km/h. And therefore, in the TIA, the traffic impact assessment, they will have to provide the relevant data. So that's the design. That is how we require them to come up with a worst-case scenario in order to ensure that the answer that we get will be indeed the worst-case scenario, the most serious impact. So that's the design of the study. So in the study brief, we will require them to calculate that. Sorry, what's the first question? It's about the emission inventory data. The Bureau said that you would consider that. Well, for emission inventory, well, for the detailed breakdowns and the sources of emission, all right, under the current EIA report, they should have included everything in the report. In the EIA report, they have a number of appendices. They are very detailed, and sometimes the public might find them too detailed. But then in simple terms, for the information provided in the appendices, that should be sufficient for you to compile another EIA report, and then you can also redo all the calculations in the EIA report. But then, according to the experts, they are still not adequate. I think you're talking about two things. It's about Tier 1 and 2. Tier 1 and Tier 2, I was referring to the closest sources of emission. All the information will be included in the report, but then for background sources, well, in a situation, there might not have been any change to the basic data from the EPD because they've only obtained that, for example, in the 2012 estimates or projection, they've only looked at the past model findings, and then they would add the result to the Tier 1, Tier 2 calculations, and then they can come up with the cumulative impact or assessment, and there is no need for them to repeat what's already been announced by the EPD. And also to respond to what Professor Fong just said, that is, he's not able to find certain data. In fact, for the 2020 emission data, well, last year in November, on the emission projection, we've already done that. For example, for power plants, roads, and also vessels, and also aircraft. Well, last year we already announced all the data, and if you want to compare that with the 2010 data, that's already uploaded onto the web already, and therefore you can also see the volume of emission for 2010, and all you need to do is to compare the two tables, and then you'll be able to see what's the change. And then correspondingly, PATH has also been incorporating such data in the projection or in the calculation model. All right. there is no need for us to impose any time limits. That's why the discussion atmosphere has been very good, and we should have ended by 6 o'clock. But then I'm sure you all want to come to some conclusions and also follow up on certain cases. So is it okay if I extend the meeting till 6:15, if there is no objection? And also, Mr. Mok, you have something to add? And then I can also see that Dr. Nikki Lam would also like to follow up on certain issues. Yes, Mr. Mok. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just referred to a lot of complicated technical issues. It's not that I don't want the public to know, and I'm grateful to Dr. Fong in telling us, well, to what extent he would like to get the detailed data about past emission data. Because when we try to talk about the assumptions in abstract terms, how deep are we going to go? Well, we have no idea. But then you've made it clear that is to what extent have we been able to reduce the emission? Yes, we'll be prepared to release that. And actually, we would be prepared to go even one step further, because together with the academics and scholars, we can also discuss in greater detail about the sources of emission. Because in a community, we can see that you do have a lot of skepticisms or areas that you don't entirely know. And even if we include the information onto the web, you might not be able to fully understand that. So we'll have to discuss with some academics as to whether or not we need to set up some committees, because we are upgrading our past modeling. And if we are able to do that, then the community would find it easier to understand the science behind this and also the supporting data, so that you will have a clear idea as to what they are. And Dr. Lam also said that, well, for the past modeling and also the relationship with the mainland targets, whether or not there should be a discount to their target. Well, whatever target you come up with, well, you might say that the threshold should be set at 50 or 40%, so there would be difficulty in reaching a consensus. But then we have already come up with a worst-case scenario, as Dr. Ho has just said. Well, they do have a range for achieving their targets on the mainland. So even if they are not able to meet the highest target, they would still be able to meet the lowest one. All right, what we're trying to do is to adopt the worst case scenario, the lowest target. So I think that's adequate. And also another colleague also referred to T1, 2, and 3. What's important is, in the worst case scenario, we will have to focus on Tier 1 and Tier 2, because the impact on us would be most significant. And then for Tier 3, relatively speaking, the impact would be less serious, but then we will also have to sort it out with the academics. But then for Tier 3, are you able to come up with a worst-case scenario? Yes, we have already adopted that. We have already incorporated that. We have already taken the initiative to include that. Yes, Dr. Lam? Yes, I think my views are very close to what Mr. Mok just said. It's about the worst-case scenario. All right, should a journalist approach me and ask me about this, then I would say that I have no idea what they are doing. Then there would be no public confidence at all. But then if there is an endorsement policy, for example, for the 2020 mitigation or reduction targets, and if we know all that, then we can say that we've already read through all the assumptions and we believe that they do make sense. And then for Tier 1 and Tier 2, how do they present the assumptions to the public? All right, that's another issue.
Concerning the worst case scenarios mentioned by Mr. Mok, I agree with him. My only concern is in which year. Say, for example, meteorological conditions affect air pollution very much. Which year do they adopt? Is it we need an idea of about which year is reasonable, and it seems that the current EIA has not taken that into account. Let me supplement 1 or 2 points. First, on the assumptions. Now, the latest is the assumptions of the 2020 path. Or rather, The latest is the 2020 assumptions for PATH. Each project has its own assessment year. We cannot put the PATH assumptions on the internet for reference. They do not mean they are the assumptions of each EIA. If it is into the year 2020, then they will adopt that. But if it is not for the year 2020, then they will have to make other assumptions. After attending the briefings, I know the members of public do want to know what is in 2020 in the 2020 scenario. We can put such information into the PATH briefing, so that members of the public know what we've put into the model. This will enable members of the public to understand our assumptions. So we'll do it. As for the meteorological conditions or data, we spend a lot of time to run meteorological data. We can't do it overnight. In the past years, we have spent a lot of effort on dealing with the meteorological data. What we do is even better than those overseas. Say they may just do 10 odd days for a year. In Hong Kong, we ask for the whole year's meteorological data. We've worked through many meteorological data and models in order to come up with 1 year data. And we can, of course, we can work more, but Professor Fong can supplement. It's really time-consuming to run such models. Whether the data in PATH can be made available to the public, absolutely yes. But we're talking about tens of thousands of data. We spend half a day to copy the data on the hard disk. And if you want to download it from the web, you really want to take many, many hours. In overseas countries, they do not have so much data. For us, we have a lot of information. That is technical difficulty to put it on the web, because it's not just about wind. It was about every hour in a year. Only consultants, academics ask us for information. We need a big server to allow people to download such data, and we have thought about it. If members of the public want to get such data, we will give them. But do they understand such data? I believe they have great difficulties. How do they make use of the data? I don't rule out that they may use it. If they have the need, then we'll provide the data. Over so many years, only academics and consultants ask for the information for such data, and therefore we do it that way. We think that's the most effective way. If you want to get the data, give us the hard disk, and we'll copy the data for you. But after we've got the new PATH model, and if there are better ways to deal with that, then we'll do it. We'll adopt it. If I may ask for one more question. Now, time is limited. Now, the two academics. Everything is subject to time limit here. But today is good. We have fewer members and we can talk freely. Now, perhaps everyone will have 2 minutes to speak to speak his conclusion and also the things they want to follow up. The guest first. Madam Chairman, can I speak first because I have to leave earlier? No, I don't allow you because we don't have a quorum if you leave. Professor Fong, as a conclusion, I have no doubt about the PATH model and the 3-tier system. The only doubt is the assumptions and the database. They have to be transparent. This point is also mentioned by Professor Lam, you give 1 year's meteorological field, but is that year's meteorological field representative, or is it just random? Is it just chosen at random? You adopted the year 2010, but in terms of climatological representation, is it a representative year? The meteorological field is very important for a whole EIA report. Professor Nicky Lam. Like Dr. Fong, I support the three-tier system. It's a good thing. I have two important points. First, data transparency. And also emission inventory, modeling, validation, and emission inventory and summary. I think there can be a separate document in form of a summary to make that known to the public. Say in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, they do it that way. They have a summary. And then the assumptions. The assumptions should be as transparent as possible, instead of allowing people just to fish among the thick pile of documents. If members of the public want to know what the government's doing, I think the EPD is doing something very decent. But transparency is not enough, and people have no confidence. So what they're doing is in fact 100 marks, but people just give them 80 marks. Now first, whether the emission data can be made public, that's something I want to know. And happy to hear that there is improvement. There are separate data for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Say, if the project doesn't go ahead, can I know the air quality in 2020 and 2020 or 2025 if the project doesn't go ahead? If we need to pick a certain year for Tier 2 or Tier 3, will I be able to see that in the EIA report? You mean the with and without the project, the scenarios of with or without the project. It depends on the items. Say, for example, Central Kowloon route. They have the total emission of vehicles for different years. Sometimes it may be relatively complicated. A road project may affect the roads that are unrelated to this trunk road. For items that have strong correlations or interrelations, it may be difficult. But for a chimney, that's very different. Whether you have the chimney or you don't have the chimney is easy to find out the with and without scenario. For projects that are not related, you can make a prediction. Say in 2025 or 2020, without this project, the T2, Tier 2, Tier 3 impacts can be made available, and that will give more confidence to the green groups. We know the with and without scenarios. I know that for road projects, they are interrelated. But what about the third runway is rather separate, isolated. The with or without scenario will give people confidence. Yes, we'll do it for the third runway. They will give you the scenario without the third runway. Is it in the is it in a brief in the methodology paper? Okay, the Undersecretary. Chairman, we have this opportunity. Although not too many people are here, we have an in-depth discussion on the matter. It's very good. I know Mr. Kwok is specifically interested in the future. If there are any technical questions which Mr. Kwok is interested to discuss with my colleagues, I welcome that. Our experts are worried that people have no interest. If people have real interest, they are happy to talk to you. Now you can see that in our team is very professional. Our team is knowledgeable, and in Hong Kong, we also have experts outside the government who have the professional knowledge, who also have the seal for the development of air quality modeling in Hong Kong. The third thing I want to say is that we have made a decision. We will enhance transparency. Will enhance the system, will enhance transparency. We cannot bear with the doubts put on us. So, concerning how to communicate with the academics and other experts, whether there can be a mechanism for regular exchanges so as to enhance the confidence in the path and in the path process, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, members, for sitting through, and I thank the two academics and also the government officials. The discussion atmosphere is very good. Going back to 1998, the year 2003, there is no cutting short of discussion. The administration can talk with members cordially on matters of common concern. That is a rare occasion that we have such a good discussion. I thank members and officials and academics. Thank you very much.